Okay, welcome. I am your warm-up band. The headline act coming later. I'm going to talk about Otto, just a first look at Otto. It's very new, it's got a lot of rough edges and some little hidden traps and pitfalls, but I think it is worth looking at, and I think you may be pleasantly surprised when you try it. So, overview. It's from Hashimoto. It's billed as a successor to Vagrant. Essentially what it is at the moment, it's a wrapper for Vagrant, Packer and Terraform in that order. So you have Vagrant for the dev environment, spin up a VirtualBox VM. You have Packer to make machine images on the target platform. And you have Terraform to build the cloud infrastructure into which you then deploy your instances from those images. Free Consul for every customer. Well, the documentation says that, but I only got it once, so maybe it's a limited offer. It's written in Go, it's all open sourced on GitHub. You can develop apps written, of course, in Go, PHP, Node, Python, Ruby, Java. There's a kind of backdoor support for Docker, but only via external image builds. It's not done within Otto, presumably not yet. Bafflingly, it's available for the ARM architecture. Hashimoto is releasing all of his Go tools for ARM, so you can run it on your Raspberry Pi. Of course, running Vagrant on the Raspberry Pi is an exercise for the reader. Okay, overview. It detects the application type. So if you have a file .php, it randomly assumes you're writing a PHP app, or you can tell it by means of a configuration file, which I'll show you later. It creates a VirtualBox VM using Vagrant, installs the dependencies and tools it sees fit to support whatever language your application is in. The VM is used as the development environment where you do stuff, and what it does is you start in Otto with a project directory on your laptop basically, and when you start the VirtualBox VM via Vagrant, it does an external volume mount back into that project directory so that the code files are shared between the VM and your project directory. All the downstream work does not come from the VM, it comes from the project directory. The VM is basically just for you to play around and do the development work in. It makes a target image from your project directory, not from the VM. There's no attempt to do export of virtual machines or anything like that. It implements the infrastructure, for example, AWS VPC. In fact, right now, it only supports AWS VPC, but obviously it's going to support more in the future. It configures the services, so things like the VPC gateways and so on and so on, and it deploys it to the infrastructure. And it describes itself as being application level versus machine level configuration. So, problems. It's very early stage. There are lots of issues. The things documentation doesn't tell you. Documentation is a bit scarce at the moment. Cloud deployment is only to AWS and only to US East. I mean, presumably that's going to change. It's just a config, really. But when you deploy to AWS, you can either do a simple VPC, which is basically your application in a VPC, or you can do a fancy one, which gives you a public-private VPC with NAT, Bastion, your application instance, and 3 Consul instances in a cluster. It only uses for this the Ubuntu 12.04 VMware image for the Vagrant virtual machine, and that's one from HashiCorp. When it's doing the AMI builds on AWS, it doesn't handle apt-get, update, or force properly. The result of this is some of the things you try to install, apt will grumble, this repository cannot be validated because it didn't run apt-get update first. Bizarrely, you try a few minutes later and it works. Things sometimes don't work, try again. Sometimes there's like timing problems, so when it's talking to Vagrant, sometimes it'll go, and then you just try again and it'll work. The on-screen instructions are wrong in places, I'll show you that. When you deploy the simple VPC just with your application instance, you're supposed to get a free Consul instance as well. I got it once, the first time I tried running it, and I've never seen one since. all their decisions as regards dependencies, utilities and support. So for PHP you get Apache 2 and npm. Yuck. And of course, watch out for US-centric spellings in the commands. So, what do you need? Obviously you've got to have Otto, it's a Go binary, download it, easy. You've got to have VirtualBox, you need Vagrant, Packer and Terraform. If you don't have those installed, Otto will go, hey, I now need this, and I'm going to install it. You've got to have your AWS keys in environment variables, which are different to the usual environment variables you use with your traditional utilities for talking to AWS via the command line. That could be a feature, I suppose. You need to invent a password to protect your AWS credentials, so when you enter them for the first time, it'll ask you the password, and then you have to put that in later. In a masterpiece of security, you can also put your password in the environment variable. And you need a path to your SSH public key, because it wants to stuff that both into the Vagrant VMs and into the target AWS instances when you make them. So, what you start with? You start with a directory. You make a directory, and in it you put your application, a simple PHP file for the purposes of my demo. An app file you can create which defines various things about what you're working on. You can tell it it's a PHP application. For the very simplest stuff, you don't need an app file. Otto claims to work it all out itself. You can do various other things in app files like dependencies and downloads, but I'm not going to go in that here. You run auto compile. It either detects the app type or will read a hidden file, which is basically a UUID, identify your project, and a project info directory, .otto, which has loads of stuff in it about your project. The app file is read only when you run auto compile. Now, this is described as a feature in the sense that you can share app files around and put them in version control, and you're still working on the one you've got until you've done the git pull and so on. It doesn't tell you that your project directory actually needs to be a VCS repo, and it needs to be committed, or the thing chokes later on. So, your app file, your app, and the .otto ID are supposed to go into your VCS, for example, Git. So, an app file looks like this. It's HCL format, whatever that is. It looks like JSON, but it's large. So, you name the application. That's what you get in the .otto directory. You get this big tree of stuff to do with the app file, the application, the deployment, the Vagrant stuff, the script packages and stuff, things you need to support that application, both in the VMware's the day job, both in the VM under Vagrant and in your target instance. And then there's loads of further stuff down here that would have been too small to read. So you run AutoDev, and it uses Vagrant to fire up your VirtualBox VM. What it does is, here's one I made earlier, and it makes a VM which it then clones to launch the instance you're actually going to use. Don't have to write Vagrant files, good. It downloads this Ubuntu image, the HashiCorp one, starts the VirtualBox, installs the tools that it thinks you need. It uploads it doesn't really upload it, because it's mounted as a volume back into your project directory. So the code you develop within the Vagrant VM is then available back in the project directory for the later stages, and vice versa, of course, it's a mounted volume. So if you change either end, it's okay. All the later stages operate from the project directory, not the VM. You can SSH into it, of course. You don't do Vagrant SSH, you do AutoDev SSH, which is just a wrapper around that. And it puts you straight into the directory where your project directory mounted back on the volume. It uses layers to speed things up, so it caches things like the VM, the image, the HashiCorp image used to launch the VirtualBox VM, and you can show the layers with a command to do that. what you get, for this example, I did a simple PHP app, and this is what it decided to give me. A VM with 2 CPUs, seems a bit over the top, and only 384 meg of RAM. So, 2 NICs, NAT and host only. Obviously you need host only if you want to talk in. 80 gig disk, Apache 2 with NPM pre-fall, yep. GCC, G++, the shared folder mounted back into your project directory, no database. If you want a database, you can add it as a dependency in that file, so you can specify you want MySQL or Postgres or so on. If you want the thing to behave as you expect, you actually have to link this directory in the VM, because it kind of thinks you want to do this, which, why would you? And Otto status, which is the command that shows you how you are through the build chain, now shows dev environment created, meaning the VirtualBox VM. Now the bad news. Watch out for .otto.d. It makes this in your home directory the first time you run Otto. And it stores state. This is where the cache stuff goes. But what it does is it hard-coded points to paths in your first project directory. So if you move or rename that directory, Otto gets very, very confused. Now, they do point out that it's not well suited for sharing and shouldn't be, really. It's only safe to move the app file, your code files for your project, and maybe the .otto ID file, although I'm not clear how useful that would be outside the context of that directory. Okay, next you run Otto Infra, and Infra uses Terraform to set up your remote target environment, your VPC on AWS. So, makes the VPC, subnets, routing tables, security groups, internet gateway, and so on. These different environment variables, and this step's quite quick, and what you'll get then is you get the VPC, you get the security groups, and all that. It's all made for you. Nice. When it finishes, it says you can now run auto deploy, which is actually wrong. You can't do that. You have to run auto build next. Gotchas in the infra. The infrastructure is shared. So if another app file references the same infrastructure, it will use that and not make a new one. Again, that's probably a feature. So when you've done that, you see here you get, this is the output of Otto status. So it tells you your project name, and it goes to the various stages: the dev, the infra, the build, and the deploy. So the build process, this basically is running Packer. Now, any of you came to my talk on Packer at the train line last year, you'll know what Packer does. Packer launches an instance on AWS, uploads stuff, configures it, downloads stuff, installs packages, all that, stops the instance, registers an AMI from it. I mentioned the thing about apt-get install sometimes failing. Just try again and it works. So now when you run dev status, you did your dev environment, you've done your infra, and you've done your build. Now, I won't be demoing that tonight because it takes about 20 minutes because of how long it takes to register the AMI. It seems to be getting slower and slower. This is the bit that doesn't work unless your project directory is a Git repo and it's been committed. You can just do local commit, so you can just do git add, git commit, that's enough, it's happy. And it's very slow, and the docs say all the stuff you can try is free tier on AWS, but actually this step kicks up a C3 large. Okay, so it's but I don't call that free tier instance. Okay, now the deploy. The deploy is the bit that actually puts the AMI, launches the AMI into your VPC and gives you a working instance. In simple mode, you're supposed to get this app VM on Consul sometimes. I got it once, as I said, and never saw it again. In the full VPC mode, you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 machines set up in your VPC with public, private, the routing tables, the NAT, the bastion, and all that, just like that. Nice. You just want to spin this up quickly. You can SSH into it because it's uploaded your public keys, and your PHP apps are in here. Serve, name of your app. Apache 2 is configured, but desperately simply. then when you finish, you get rid of stuff like this. Deploy destroy gets rid of your VPC instances. Infra destroy gets rid of the VPCs themselves. And dev destroy deletes the VM. No destroy of build. You've got to manage your AMI forest yourself. So, do you see that at the back? I tried to make it big. So, what I've done is, I've done a bit of cheating here to save time. So, I've already done the step that downloads the HashiCorp image for the VM, so you don't have to wait for that. And I'm not going to run build because it takes too long, but I've got here's one I made earlier to show you the deploy process. So, what have I got in here? I've just got the app file and a little PHP web application. So what's in the app file? Just what I showed you on the screen. And what's in the PHP file? Just very simple PHP thing. Okay. So first you run auto compile. Now you see you have the .auto and the .auto ID file. Now you run Otto Infra. I put in my credentials already, of course, so now all I have to do is type the password, get the thing to work. Now hopefully the network will work and it's going. So it's creating your VPC and uploading the public key to do the key pair, and it's done. This is the bit that's wrong. It says you now run auto deploy. You don't. You have to run auto build. But I'm not going to do that because it's way too slow. So, no, hang on. I missed a step. You working? Speak to me.
Yep.
That's kicked up your dev machine there. And it's done it by cloning this one. So these are what it thinks of as layers. You've got the one that is precisely Ubuntu, then you've got the one with the PHP in it, and then you've got the one with your app. There, I'm into the machine, and there's your stuff. There's your app file and your DevOps thing. Now, he's told me I've only got 3 minutes, so I've got to do this quickly. So, now, we're not going to do the build. Here's one I did earlier. So, the infra is done, the build is done, which means the AMI has been registered, and now I can just go auto deploy.
It's a micro.
And here's the VM coming up, the AWS instance. Just give me the bit of paper that says 1 minute, I'll show it. Okay, there it is. It's made your instance. I hate scrape the pattern. Nice. It's still spinning up. It's still spinning up. Right, so it's running. Okay, it'll come, hopefully. So, my time's up, I'll stop there, and I'll attempt questions.
Network error.
Network error. Well,
should we give it another minute?
the instance is there. Give it another minute, I'll take questions.
Any questions for Andrew?
Is layering done in such a way that it can be backported or used in Vagrant?
Sorry, I didn't understand that.
Is the layering that you were talking about in Otto implemented in such a way that it can be used or backported to Vagrant?
Haven't a clue. I would suspect not, because the declared goal of Otto is actually to replace Vagrant. Look, if I go, there's one more slide back on my presentation which actually answers some of this.
Yeah, I can see that, but it's a very different tool.
Okay. So, very early days, lots of rough edges, considerable promise. This directory malarkey's got to be sorted out, because it means you can't take your project directory and move it to another machine without Otto going loopy. Hopefully it'll support Docker. Obviously it should support all the kind of target environments that Terraform supports. And presumably Vagrant functionality will gradually be subsumed into Otto, and then Ruby can be consigned to the fires of hell. HashiCorp stuff is usually pretty good. I mean, the only kind of misfire they seem to have had is Surf, and I'm not really sure what you use that for, given the Consul is so much better. So basically, as far as I can see, the .otto.d directory is just kind of like, they call it a directory. It's just a tree of stuff, of the layers and the info. Whether it's Vagrant compatible or not, I don't know. Yes?
I just was listening to a podcast, I think it was before Christmas, either Shop Talk or the Chain Talk, I don't remember which one, but Mitchell was on it, talking about it.
Yes.
And he said that as far as he's presently concerned, Vagrant will be maintained.
Oh yes, there are too many people using it. You can't throw Vagrant away now.
Well, no, not just that. He says that it will remain a separate decoupled component from it, in that sense.
Yes.
So just for the rest of the room, Mitchell Mojo said that Vagrant will continue as its own thing. It's not going to be thrown away.
Ta-da!
Hey.
Yeah.
Just for now, you said you have to provide an AWS user. It's easy to work out what kind of policy to give that user.
I just used my personal AWS account, so all I needed was the private key, the public key, the access key, and the secret key. That's all. I didn't need any more. How that would work with IAM, I'm not sure. I think to begin with, only give this simple use cases to play with, really. Complicated stuff will come later. Any one of you who were at the Doxlon presentation last week, I have to say HashiCorp Vault looks very interesting as a product for storing your AWS keys in and all that. Yeah. Any more?
How many of the Terraform things are configurable on the app file at the moment? I
Very
say
little.
very little.
Very little. Very little. Basically, the only choices are: do you want AWS simple or do you want AWS public-private?
And that's it.
But bearing in mind it's using Terraform underneath, I can't see that eventually it won't support
Yeah, that's
all
what
the
I was
targets for
thinking. Like
Terraform.
maybe they will start using open source modules for Terraform, and then you will be able to configure everything. But you know.
The whole of Go is open source. It's on GitHub.
Yeah,
Sorry,
you
the
can-
whole of Otto is in Go and it's on GitHub. Any more? Yep.
One more.
Does I think you may have answered that with the Terraform answer, but does Otto give you any help in sort of transitioning from I'm on my laptop, I've got a web server and I've got a database, to I'm in the cloud and I've got redundant AJ proxy instances talking to redundant web servers, talking to a master database pair?
No. No. I mean, that may come later. I think what this is really intended for is kind of rapid prototyping and development, which you can then get out into AWS fast. As a major software deployment configuration tool, it certainly isn't that now. Might become that later. I think it definitely is watch this space. It's an interesting notion. It's certainly a very kind of user-friendly in that it isolates you from a lot of the craft you have to do with Packer and Terraform, and you just run a 3-word command or a 2-word command. Yeah.
Following on from that, does it resolve the issue with Vagrant and Vagrant file can be used to kind of test like many different kinds of, so you can have 3 different machines, or you can have just 1 machine, or you can try different images, like Sentinel's image.
Well, right now for the Vagrant and the VirtualBox, there's only the one image it gives you, which is the HashiCorp Precise 64. That's it. There is no other choice.
Is there a concept of like profiles? So you can,
Not
like,
yet.
Right. Okay.
Not yet. Maybe coming. Remember, it's very, very early days. Right now, it's I would call it little more than a proof of concept. But it's interesting enough to keep watching.
So a couple of slips there with VMware from your day job coming in. What about users trying to deploy this on private clouds who are maybe not able to leverage AWS APIs, need to use
Well,
VMware?
they can't
or
deploy
something?
anything except AWS at the moment. Nothing else is supported. Right? Although it uses Terraform, and Terraform supports lots of things, Otto does not yet support any other target deployment via Terraform except AWS.
There's no way of customizing it in.
Not without digging into the code, but why bother? I'm sure they're going to do that. Why would HashiCorp have Terraform and then cripple Otto? Makes no sense.
Okay, and on that note, thank you very much, Andrew.